What would you do if a blind baby elephant, too weak to stand, too broken to cry, already slipping away, suddenly reacted to the footsteps of a stray dog? No one even noticed. On the edge of the African savanna, a newborn who had given up on life met a creature who had nothing left to give except presence. No miracles, no dramatic rescues, just one animal refusing to leave another to die. And that single choice changed everything. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. Stay with me, because once you hear how these two forgotten souls found each other, you'll never look at survival the same way again. Dawn came slowly to the savanna, washing the horizon in a pale gold that clung to the lingering cold of the night. The first beams of sunlight slid across the red dust, warming patches of earth in long, trembling lines. It was the kind of morning that usually carried the sounds of life, hornbills calling from acacia branches, wildebeest shuffling somewhere in the tall grass. But today, the plains felt muted, hesitant, as if holding their breath. Amani, the ranger on her early patrol shift, pushed her jeep along the edge of the reserve, scanning the landscape with practiced precision. She had seen every shade of suffering the savanna could offer. Snared antelopes, orphaned calves, wounded lions crawling away from territorial fights. But something about this morning unsettled her. There was a stillness that didn't belong. Her gaze drifted across the horizon until it caught on a small, unmoving shape, pressed against the border of the reserve. At first, she thought it was just a termite mound or maybe a fallen log. But as she drew closer, the outline sharpened a small gray form curled unnaturally against the earth. Too soft, too fragile to be anything but young. Amani slowed and the vehicle stepped out and walked toward it. As she approached, she felt her throat tighten. It was an elephant no more than a few months old, lying on its side with its legs drawn close to its belly. The calf's ear twitched faintly in the warming breeze, but otherwise, it lay completely still, as if the weight of the world had pressed it flat against the ground. "Hey, little one," Amani murmured, kneeling beside him. She clicked her tongue softly, then tapped her knuckles against her water canister. The metallic sound usually stirred even the weakest calves. But this one did not move. He didn't lift his head, didn't shift his body, didn't even try to locate the source of the sound. His breathing was shallow, uneven, nearly silent beneath the rustle of grass. Amani's eyes swept the area. No adult elephants, no fresh tracks, no broken branches or disturbed soil to suggest a herd grazing nearby. A lone elephant calf this young never survived on its own, not unless something had gone horribly, irreversibly wrong. She whispered to herself, "Why are you alone?" The calf gave no answer. He didn't reach out with his trunk to search for comfort the way calves usually did. He didn't try to rise when she touched his shoulder. The sun grew brighter, heating the earth beneath him, but he didn't reposition his body to avoid the warmth, didn't attempt to find shade or water. In the savanna, a baby elephant that didn't cry for its mother, didn't try to stand, didn't even flinch, was a baby that had already given up. Amani radioed the veterinary unit. Within minutes, a dust cloud marked the arrival of their truck. Dr. Ndlovu stepped out, a tall man with steady hands and eyes that had witnessed too many endings. He approached the calf, kneeling down beside him with the calm of someone who understood the exact shape of despair. He gently lifted one of the calf's eyelids. The calf didn't resist. The doctor exhaled, slow and heavy. "Look," he said softly. Amani leaned closer. The calf's eyes were cloudy pale and milky with no trace of light recognition. "He can't see," Ndlovu said. "Not even a little. Completely blind." He waved his hand in front of the calf's eyes. No response. He tapped the ground near its head. Nothing. He touched the calf's neck. The skin was cold dry, lacking the supple warmth of a healthy elephant. Severe dehydration, he continued. Body temperature too low. Respiration unstable. He's not injured. He's finished fighting. Amani swallowed. Can he survive? The doctor didn't answer immediately. Instead, he rested a hand lightly on the calf's flank. In the wild, not a chance, he said. Even with help, it will depend on whether he chooses to live. And right now, he shook his head. He hasn't chosen that. While the medical team prepared fluids, Amani walked a wide circle around the scene, studying the ground. It didn't take long to find the signs. Massive footprints, fresh, scattered in erratic patterns, marked the grass. Nearby, a thin streak of dried blood stained the soil. Her stomach twisted. Poachers. The herd must have been ambushed in the night. In the chaos, trumpeting, scrambling adults clustering around wounded relatives, the blind calf would have lagged behind, confused by the sudden panic around him. Without vision, he would have stumbled, tripped, fallen behind, as the herd fled from danger. The blood on the earth belonged to one of the adults, likely his mother. Amani bowed her head, imagining the final scene. The herd fleeing through the darkness, the baby disoriented, and slow calling out, but unheard stumbling, until he collapsed. Then the long, cold night alone, waiting for predators, or death, whichever arrived first. He didn't survive the night, Amani whispered. He just didn't die. The team lifted the calf gently onto a tarp, then onto the back of the truck. His body rocked with every bump, but he remained limp, unresponsive, as though already drifting between worlds. We'll take him to the rescue station, Ndlovu said. It's probably a lost cause. But we try. The drive back was long and uneven. Dust billowed around the vehicle, settling on the calf's small frame. Amani watched him carefully, counting each breath, each faint rise and fall of his chest. He didn't move, not even once. At the station, workers prepared a quiet stall lined with soft soil. When they set the calf down, he simply melted into the ground, as if grateful the journey was over. They wiped dust from his face. He didn't react. They offered water mixed with milk. He refused. They tried touching his trunk, hoping instinct might guide him to accept nourishment. But he stayed still, as if the world no longer held meaning. What should we call him? One caretaker asked softly. Keto, another replied. It means the little one. Kasturuk, Keto, Amani repeated gently. But the calf's ears didn't twitch. It was the same whether they spoke his name, or clapped their hands, or called out from the other side of the stall. He wasn't ignoring them. He simply didn't care. He had turned inward, choosing solitude over survival. Elephant calves normally sought warmth, leaning against adults lying atop siblings, tucking themselves beneath motherly shadows. But Keto wasn't searching for anything. He lay motionless, breathing in shallow, fading intervals. When a caretaker touched his back, he neither tightened his muscles nor shifted away. He only accepted the contact with a kind of resigned numbness. He's not fighting anymore, Amani said quietly. He's letting go. Everyone understood the implication. In the rescue station, the first night often decided fate. Most calves that refused to drink, refused to respond, refused to search for comfort, never made it until morning. They dimmed the stall lights as evening approached. Staff retreated to their quarters. The savanna outside hummed with the nocturnal orchestra of insects, rustling leaves, distant calls of hyenas and jackals. The station grew still, but not completely. Past midnight, something moved near the outer fence, silent, steady, almost cautious. Footsteps, light and uneven, approached the elephant stall. A shape emerged from the shadows, a dog's skinny, scarred ribs outlined beneath patchy fur. A stray, one of thousands wandering the outskirts of human settlements. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply walked toward the stall, head low, tail motionless, as though drawn by an instinct that neither hunger nor fear could explain. He stopped a few feet from the sleeping calf, studying him with dark, quiet eyes. He sniffed the air, then sat down, just sat, without moving, without looking away. Minutes passed. Then an hour. The dog lay down, tucking his battered body close to the wooden slats of the stall. He rested his chin on his paws and watched Keto breathing each breath thinner than the last. No one came outside to see him. No one realized that a creature who had survived his own share of hardships had chosen to spend the night beside another who had already surrendered. But there, beneath the faint starlight and the soft rustle of savanna winds, the scarred dog remained. He didn't leave, he didn't sleep. He simply stayed as if he understood that something fragile, something fading needed not a miracle, only a witness. Was there ever a miracle waiting for Keto, or was the stray dog the miracle he needed all along? What do you think? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe before we move into the most powerful part of this story. The second night at the rescue station fell heavier than the first. By the time the last lantern in the staff quarters flickered low, the compound was wrapped in darkness. Only a single oil lamp burned outside the small infirmary, its weak halo struggling against the vast, star-strewn sky. Crickets buzzed in the dry grass. Somewhere far off, a hyena laughed once and went silent again. Inside his stall, Keto lay where they had left him, on his side legs, drawn and trunk resting uselessly on the soil. His breathing was a soft, broken rhythm in the quiet. He had survived one more day, but not because he wanted to. The fluids and careful hands had carried his body past another sunset. His mind remained somewhere else, somewhere dark and distant. Out beyond the fence, light footsteps approached. The same stray dog from the night before slipped through a gap in the bush's ribs, faintly visible beneath his thin coat. He paused, nose lifting, to catch the smells of the station dust dung human's medicine. And then he moved with quiet certainty toward the elephant stall. This time he didn't stop a few meters away. He walked right up to the wooden slats and lowered himself to the ground, pressing his body so close to the stall wall that his fur brushed the rough wood. He turned his back to the wind, curling around, as if forming a barrier between the night and the calf behind him. Every so often he raised his head, ears pricked, and stared through the gap at the dim bulk of Keto's body. Then, content that nothing had changed, he lowered his chin back onto his front paws. No one saw him there. The rangers were asleep. The caretakers were inside drinking tea and comparing exhaustion. Only the cold, unblinking eye of the security camera mounted on a post watched as the dog settled in and refused to move. Hours passed. He didn't bark. He didn't whine. He didn't scratch at the door for food or attention. He simply lay there, breathing slow, a silent guard for a calf that everyone assumed had stopped caring whether he lived or died. Near midnight, something shifted inside the stall. Keto had lain for so long in complete stillness that even the insects had stopped treating him as a threat. Now, for the first time since he'd been brought in, his body made a decision of its own. His flank rose slightly higher with each breath. His chest expanded, hesitated, then contracted in a way that suggested not just survival, but awareness. He rolled his ear toward the faint sound outside, the long, measured exhale of another animal resting close by. The dog shifted his weight claws, scraping lightly across the packed earth. The tiny sound carried through the slats. Keto's ear twitched again. His rib cage fluttered with a different kind of effort, as though he were trying to hear with his whole body. When the dog curled tighter against the stall, his shoulder brushed the wood, producing a dull, dragging sound. Keto's trunk, which had lain like a fallen branch in the dirt, lifted a few centimeters, then dropped again. It wasn't much. No one watching with human eyes in that moment would have thought this is the turning point. But for a calf that had surrendered so completely, even the smallest movement was a rebellion against death. To the camera, it recorded as a sequence of tiny motions, a shift of the chest, a subtle turn of the head, an ear jerking in response to a noise beyond the wall. Each time the dog adjusted his position, the elephant's body acknowledged it just a fraction, just enough to say, "I hear you." Just before dawn, as the sky behind the acacia trees turned the soft color of ash before fire, the dog stood up, stretched, and shook dust from his fur. The vibration thrummed through the wood into the stall. Quito's trunk recoiled slightly, curling in toward his chest. He was still weak, still blind, still hovering on the edge. But he was not entirely gone. When the morning crew arrived, they found the dog exactly where the camera had seen him all night, curled at the base of Quito's stall head, resting on his paws, eyes half closed but alert. As the latch on the gate rattled, he rose and stepped aside, trotting a short distance away, but not leaving. One of the caretakers frowned. "Is that Stray back again?" Amani, who had joined the morning round, glanced at the dog and then at Quito. The calf's head was slightly raised, not much, but higher than the lifeless sprawl of the day before. "Hold on," she said quietly. "Watch this." They walked into the stall with a bucket of the water and milk, mixture the same concoction Quito had refused over and over. The calf's ears rotated weakly at the sound of footsteps, but his body stayed still. Then the dog padded back to the entrance and lay down, his body aligned with the opening in the slats. Quito's head turned toward the faint scuff of paws on dirt. "Try now," Amani whispered. The caretaker dipped a hand in the bucket and brought the damp fingers to Quito's mouth. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, as the dog let out a slow exhale, Quito's lips parted. His tongue flicked against the wetness. He sucked in a tentative mouthful. Everyone froze. Again, Amani said. The caretaker offered more. This time, Quito accepted without hesitation, drinking in small, shaky gulps. It wasn't much, but for a calf who had refused to fight, it was everything. "He's drinking," someone breathed. "He's drinking," Amani repeated, but her eyes were on the dog outside the stall. The stray had put his head down again, listening as if the sound of swallowing mattered more to him than anything else in the world. Later, around noon, they tried to clean the stall. One of the workers clapped his hands and shouted at the dog, waving him away. "Go out. You can't stay here." The dog flinched and then trotted reluctantly to the far side of the enclosure. He lingered by the fence, watching through the gaps. Inside the stall, Quito lay where they had left him after feeding. The broom brushed the floor, scraping away dung and old straw. For a few minutes, everything seemed ordinary. Then his breathing changed. It quickened, turning jagged and shallow. His legs twitched, hooves scraping against the ground. His head swung blindly, trunk lifting and lowering in short, frantic arcs. "What's wrong with him?" a caretaker cried. Amani watched, puzzled, then noticed something. The stall was quiet. Too quiet. The sound that had been there all morning, the soft pat of paws, the occasional sigh, was gone. "Wait," she said sharply. "Stop sweeping." They froze. Outside, the stray dog paced along the fence, whining under his breath, unsure whether he was allowed to return. Amani stepped to the gate and opened it a crack. The dog slipped past her legs and moved straight to the spot where he'd lain before. He circled once, lay down, pressed his side to the wood. Inside the stall, Quito's trunk swung in that direction. His breathing slowed. The wild panic drained out of his muscles, as though someone had turned a dial down. "Look at that," whispered one of the staff. Amani's throat tightened. "He's not afraid of us leaving," she said softly. He's afraid of the dog leaving. That afternoon, she went to find Dr. Ndlovu. "We need to talk about the stray," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "You mean the mangy little dog everyone keeps chasing away?" "Yes." "Stop chasing him away." The doctor folded his arms. "Amani, we have to be careful with disease, with—" "He's the only variable that changed," she interrupted. "We pumped Keto with fluids, we kept him warm, we followed the protocol." He didn't respond. The dog lies down outside the stall, and suddenly Keto drinks. When the dog leaves, he panics. When the dog comes back, he calms. And Ndlovu considered this, rubbing a thumb along his jawline. "We keep Keto's body alive," Amani said quietly. "But that animal out there, that animal is the only thing touching whatever is left of his will." After a long moment, the doctor sighed. "All right," he said. "We'll keep him around. But at least give him a name. I'm tired of calling him the dog in my notes." The staff gathered that evening, watching as the stray, now officially tolerated, wolfed down a bowl of leftover stew, and then trotted back to his post by Keto's stall. 7, one of the rangers suggested. Like 7 lives. Like he's already used up most of his, but somehow he's still here. In Swahili, another added, "That's Saba." "Saba," Amani repeated. The name settled on him easily, like it had been waiting there all along. "Okay then. He's Saba." From that night on, Saba was allowed to roam the area around Keto's stall freely. They washed him as best they could, picked off some of the ticks clinging to his skin, and made sure he had enough to eat. He accepted the attention politely, but as soon as he could, he would return to his chosen place, pressed to the wood, listening to the calf inside. On the second day, after they decided to keep him, something else happened. Keto tried to stand. It didn't look like much at first. He shifted his weight, planted his feet awkwardly beneath him, and pushed against the ground. His front legs locked, his back legs trembled and buckled. He crashed down again almost immediately, sending a puff of dust into the air. But everyone who saw it felt the jolt. "The first time," Amani whispered. "That's the first time he's tried." The next day, he managed 3 seconds before collapsing. The day after that, 5. They began to notice a pattern. Keto never attempted to stand when the humans walked in alone. He only tried when Saba padded into place outside the stall paws, shuffling nails, clicking softly against the packed dirt. Every time the dog approached, Keto's head turned. His ears angled toward the sound, his muscles tightened, not in fear, but in effort. It was as if he were trying to get closer, trying to rise to meet the presence he could not see. "He's not standing for us," one of the caretakers said quietly, scribbling notes on a clipboard. "He's standing for the dog." They began to test it. One afternoon, Saba was encouraged, gently this time, to walk a slow circle around the stall. His nails made a soft, rhythmic scraping sound as he moved. Inside, Keto's head followed every step. When the dog turned, the calf turned. When the dog paused, the calf paused. Then Keto took a step. It was clumsy and small, more of a shuffle than anything else. His front foot slid forward, dragged by instinct and sound rather than sight. The moment it found purchase, his back legs lurched after it, nearly spilling him sideways. But he stayed upright. The staff held their breath as Saba continued his slow circuit. Keto pivoted, moving in the same direction, using the noise of each paw fall like a beacon. There was no training session planned. No reward system. No commands. A blind elephant calf was teaching himself to navigate the world again, mapping it through the footsteps of a scarred village dog. On one of these tentative journeys, Keto's hoof caught the edge of a shallow trench near the corner of the stall. His leg folded, and he toppled onto his side with a grunt. Months or even days earlier, that would have been it. He would have stayed down, surrendered to the ease of not trying again. This time he did something different. He reached. His trunk swung outward, searching clumsily through empty air. It swept the ground, brushed the wall, slid along the wooden slats until it bumped into something warm and solid on the other side. Saba. As soon as the tip of his trunk touched the dog's back, Keto's breathing slowed. The frantic edge melted away. He stayed like that for several long seconds, trunk resting on the dog's spine, anchoring himself to the one point in his world that made sense. "It's a coping reflex," Ndlovu said, watching from the doorway. But his voice was quiet, almost reverent. "He's found himself a spiritual crutch." The days spilled forward in tiny increments. There was no dramatic transformation. Keto did not wake one morning fully strong, bounding around the enclosure. He did not regain his sight. There was no thunderclap of miracle, no sudden chorus of triumphant music. Instead, there were small things. One more sip of water than the day before. 2 extra seconds of standing. A slightly longer walk around the stall. The panic attacks grew rarer. The times he lay completely motionless grew shorter. The number of times his ears tilted toward the sound of Saba's paws increased until it felt like he was listening almost all the time. Each of these changes was tiny on its own. But together, they formed a quiet revolution. Keto was not racing toward life. He was inching toward it, one hesitant breath, one shaky step at a time. And once he began moving in that direction, he did not go back. Saba became more than just background noise. He became a fixed point in Keto's internal map, a reference in the darkness. The calf angled his head toward the dog's breathing to find his orientation. When Saba wandered too far, Keto's body tensed. When Saba settled nearby, the calf's muscles softened, his eyelids drooped, his sleep deepened. Every morning, when the light was still weak and the sky barely turning pale, Saba's arrival at the stall door marked the start of Keto's day. Before the humans came with buckets and brooms, before the station fully woke, the friendship between a blind elephant and a stray dog reset itself like a heartbeat. One day the staff gathered in the small office for a progress meeting. Charts were pinned to a corkboard, graphs of heart rate, hydration levels, weight gain. On paper, the improvements were modest, but undeniable. And Ndlovu tapped a line that showed the days when Keto had begun to eat and move more. "You see this," he said. "Coincides with fluids and consistent feeding one caretaker offered." And with this, he traced a second line, a notation of when the dog had first started sleeping by the stall. The two trends climbed together like twin rivers. "We're keeping his body alive," the vet said, setting down his pen. "But let's be honest, we're not the reason he chose to stay." Amani folded her arms. "He didn't change when we touched him. Didn't change when we talked to him. He only started moving, only started drinking when the dog was there." "So what are you saying?" another staff member asked. Ndlovu looked at the faces around him, tired, hopeful, wary of believing too much. "I'm saying this," he replied. "Keto isn't living because of medicine. He isn't living because we gave him hope. He's living because he found a friend." No one argued. Outside, beyond the thin walls of the office, a blind baby elephant shifted his weight, listening for the soft, familiar sound of paws approaching through the dust. And in a world that had once been nothing but pain and darkness and abandonment, that sound, just that, was enough to keep him here. 2 weeks later, the difference was impossible to ignore. Keto no longer spent hours frozen in the same position. He changed sides when his muscles grew stiff. He pushed himself up to standing before the caretakers had even finished opening the stall. He waited, ears tilted forward, as if anticipating a signal only he could perceive. His panic spirals, once sharp and violent, became rare. Mostly they occurred when something interrupted the pattern he had come to rely on: a strange vehicle passing too close, a sudden loud noise, or most consistently those moments when he could not hear Saba. But even then, as soon as the dog returned to his spot near the stall, Quito settled. "He's different," one of the junior vets said one morning, watching the calf drink steadily from a large bucket. "Not just physically. Look at his face. He's here now." Quito's eyes were still milky and blind, but there was something new in the way he held his head, the way his trunk explored his immediate surroundings. He was no longer collapsing inward. He was reaching out. When Saba trotted across the yard chasing a bird or investigating a new smell, Quito's head followed the sound. His ears snapped toward the rhythm of paws on packed soil. A slight echo bounced off the stall walls, and in that echo, the calf seemed to measure distance and direction with uncanny precision. The team started to joke, half serious, that he'd grown sound eyes. "Watch this one," caretakers said, opening Quito's stall gate as the sun climbed higher. Saba, as always, rushed ahead, then paused just outside, glancing back over his shoulder. Quito stepped out slowly, but without hesitation. He aimed his body toward the dog, trusting the sound of shifting dirt more than any hand that tried to guide him. When Saba moved forward, Quito followed, leaving a trail of round footprints beside the smaller scattered paw prints. Saba veered left. Quito veered left. Saba stopped to sniff a patch of grass. Quito halted, trunk reaching in the same direction, hovering above the spot, as if sharing in the investigation. "He's using Saba like a guide rope," Amani murmured. "Wherever the dog goes, that's where he knows the world is safe enough to step." With each passing day, Quito's appetite improved. He learned to associate the hollow rhythmic knock on the metal feed trough with food, and shuffled toward it, guided by both sound and scent. He ate more, rested more deeply, and when he finished a meal, his ears sometimes flapped in an almost playful twitch, a tiny echo of the joy elephants were known for. They began walking him in wider circles around the yard. The first time he stumbled frequently, hooves catching on small ridges in the soil. But he recovered each time, no longer collapsing into immobility. Saba trotted alongside, occasionally darting ahead, but never far enough to be lost to Quito's hearing. Whenever an unfamiliar noise startled him, a gate slamming, a raised human voice, Quito's trunk swung instantly toward Saba. The moment he brushed fur, his whole body loosened. His breathing steadied. The fear dissolved as quickly as it had come. Saba had no idea he had become somebody's anchor. He had no concept of responsibility, no notion that a life depended on him. He was just there. Day after day, night after night, filling the silence that had once threatened to swallow Quito whole. Before dawn, when the sky was still a shade darker than shadow, Saba would trot to the stall and scratch lightly at the earth. Inside, Quito's ears flicked awake. He pulled his legs beneath him, muscles tightening with an eagerness that hadn't existed weeks ago. "He stands faster when the dog comes," a caretaker observed. "He stands because the dog comes," Amani corrected. At night, when the lanterns dimmed and the compound grew quiet again, Saba returned to his place by the stall wall. Quito would lie down, then stretch his trunk through the slats until it brushed the familiar line of Saba's back. Only then would his breathing slow into the deep, steady rhythm of true sleep. If the dog leaves, one of the rangers noted after watching this pattern for several nights, he won't sleep. They tested it once gently. Saba chased a jackal's scent to the far end of the fence and lingered there for longer than usual. In the stall, Quito's trunk swept the wall searching. His ears fanned out, listening into emptiness. He remained tense, eyes closed, but unresting until the sound of paw steps returned. The second Saba settled into his usual spot, Quito's trunk draped over him like a tired arm. Minutes later, he was snoring softly. Nothing about his condition was perfect. He was still blind. He still misjudged distances and tripped over minor obstacles. He still depended entirely on humans for food and shelter. The wild would kill him in a day. But the defeat that had clung to him like a second skin that was gone. He had chosen in whatever way an elephant calf could choose to continue. Ndlovu stood by the fence one evening watching Quito follow Saba in a slow, lopsided loop around the yard. The sunset painted the ground in long orange shadows. Dust swirled around their feet with each step. "Remember the day we found him?" he said quietly to Amani. She nodded. "I remember thinking he'd be gone by morning." And now she smiled just a little. "Now I think he's going to outlive that dog." The vet chuckled. "Don't tell Saba that. He'll get complacent." They fell silent as Quito stumbled slightly on a small rut. His trunk swung out, brushed Saba's hind leg, and steadied. Then he kept going. "The first day looked like the end," Ndlovu said. But it was just the first page. Amani watched the strange pair move together, one large and half-broken one, small and scarred both of them, carrying invisible histories of abandonment. "Sometimes," she said, "you don't need a big future to keep going. You just need one reason not to stop. A stray dog's breath in the dark, the sound of paws on dirt in a world with no light. A presence that did not ask for anything, did not promise anything, did not try to fix what was broken, only refused to leave it alone." As the months slipped by, the miracle everyone had whispered about began to change shape. Quito was no longer the fragile scrap of calf they had carried in on a tarp. He was growing faster than anyone had quite prepared for. His legs thickened, his shoulders broadened, his back rose higher every few weeks. Growth in any other story would have been a simple blessing. Here it came with a cost. The extra weight made standing harder again. The muscles that had learned so painstakingly to lift him off the ground now had to carry more. Some mornings he paused longer before pushing himself upright, as if gauging whether it was worth the effort. After a walk around the yard, he took longer to recover his breath. He rested more between practice rounds. And he was not the only one changing. Saba was aging. At first it was subtle. He slept a little deeper, got up a little slower. After running a short distance, he stood with his mouth open, tongue lolling, drawing air into his chest with a faint rattle that hadn't been there before. On cold mornings, especially when the wind came down from the hills, the old scars along his legs and ribs seemed to stiffen him. He limped for the first few minutes of the day, working stiffness out of joints that had seen too much. Some mornings, the familiar tap of paws on packed earth came late. The humans noticed the delay with mild concern, but they were busy feeding, cleaning, medicating, balancing budgets that never seemed to stretch far enough. To them, a 10-minute delay was just that 10 minutes. Quito read it differently. He stood at the edge of his stall, ears forward, trunk raised slightly as he waited. The world beyond the wood was still a featureless depth of sound and scent, but he knew its rhythms. When Saba's steps were punctual, the morning felt right. When they were late, something inside him tightened. On those mornings before the first paw fall, he shifted his weight restlessly, trunk, reaching for a presence that wasn't there yet. The instant Saba finally arrived, breathing heavier, now nails scratching softly at the dirt, Quito's body relaxed. His trunk dropped onto the dog's back or brushed his side in a quick, relieved touch. Amani saw it happen enough times to feel the knot of unease settle into her own chest. In the small break room over bitter coffee one evening, the staff finally said out loud what had been hovering unsaid between them for weeks. What happens? One of the younger caretakers asked if Saba gets really sick. What happens if he doesn't come one morning? Another added. No one answered immediately. It's dangerous, the junior vet said at last. We've let Keto's entire emotional stability attach to a single animal. We didn't let it, Amani replied. It happened while we were trying to keep him alive. Ndlovu looked down at the report in his hands, then closed it. Intent or not, the result is the same. His life is tethered. We can't stop them being friends, someone said. No, the doctor agreed. But we also can't pretend this will last forever. Saba is old. Keto is getting heavier, stronger. Their lines are crossing. The conversation ended with no clear solution, just a shared heaviness that followed them back out into the warm, dusty evening. The warning they'd half expected came not long after. One hot afternoon, Saba didn't leave his shaded corner when the truck returned from patrol. He didn't trot over to investigate the tires or greet Keto at the stall. He lay curled in a tight ball sides, rising and falling too fast, eyes half closed. A vet knelt beside him, hand on his flank. Fever, he said quietly. He's dehydrated, probably an infection. We need to keep him in the clinic tonight. That means the caretaker at his side said slowly, he'll be away from Keto. They all looked toward the elephant stall. Just for a day, Ndlovu said. Maybe 2. He'll hear us moving around. It's not the same as losing him. They carried Saba gently into a small treatment room and set up an IV line. The dog didn't fight. He watched them with glassy eyes, tail giving a faint wag as if to reassure them instead of the other way around. That night, for the first time in months, the space outside Keto's stall remained empty. At first, Keto did what he always did. He stood ears forward, listening. The usual sequence of events pause, scratch, soft thump against the wall didn't come. Minutes stretched. The air seemed to thicken. Then he began to move. He paced the length of the stall, swinging his trunk from side to side, bumping into the walls, turning too sharply and stumbling. His breathing picked up, turned erratic. The old raw panic, the one they remembered from his earliest days in the station, rose like a ghost. He ignored the water they offered. He refused the formula. Human hands reached out to soothe him. He flinched away because the sound he needed wasn't the sound of their voices. It was the absence, not the sickness, that hit him hardest. In the clinic, Saba lifted his head at the noise of frantic trumpeting from across the yard. He tried to stand, but the IV tugged him back. A nurse pressed him gently down. Easy, she murmured. He'll be all right. You both will. But as Keto spun and stumbled in his pen, Amani watched from the doorway and understood something with painful clarity. This is our warning, she said to Ndlovu. If we don't do something the day Saba doesn't come back, we'll destroy him. The vet nodded grimly. The miracle got us this far, he said. But miracles are not a long-term management plan. The next morning, Saba was a little better. He ate a few bites, drank, even managed a weak wag of the tail when he heard Amani's voice. By the 3rd day, he was steady enough to return to his post. When they let him out of the clinic, he headed straight for Keto's stall without being shown the way. The reunion was quiet, but undeniable. Keto reached his trunk through the slats and searched until it found fur. Saba leaned into the touch and sighed that raspy breath Keto knew better than any human word. Keto settled. The staff did not. That night, as the sun bled out behind the thorn trees, they met again. We can't separate them, Amani said. If we take Saba away now, it's not just cruel, it's lethal. No one is suggesting we remove him, Ndlovu replied. But we can't leave things as they are. So what do we do? Someone asked. We expand Keto's world, the vet said. carefully, gently. We teach him that Saba is one sound among many, not the only one that means safe. They started small. A set of wooden chimes was hung near the water trough, positioned so the wind would knock them softly together at predictable times of day. A particular caretaker, with a distinctive limp and the habit of tapping his stick on the ground, was assigned to feed Quito at every morning shift so that his footsteps and the rhythm of the stick became a consistent cue. They added a hollow log by the far fence that they struck 3 times before opening the gate, the sound carrying through the yard like a low drum. At first, Quito ignored all of it. To him, safety sounded like paws on dirt and the familiar rumble of an aging dog's breath. But slowly the pattern seeped in. He began to pause when the wind shifted and the chimes answered it. He angled his head toward the knock of the caretaker's stick, recognizing it before the man spoke. He lifted his trunk when he heard the drumbeat of the log, knowing it meant the gate would soon swing wide. Saba remained at the center of his universe, but new stars were being added to the map. One morning before Saba had been let out of the clinic yard, Quito surprised them. The log was struck 3 times. The limp-footed caretaker approached his stick, ticking along the ground. Quito's ears lifted. Instead of staying down and waiting, he pushed his legs beneath him and stood. He wobbled, adjusted, and stayed upright, trunk extended, feeling the air. "But Saba's not out yet," the caretaker murmured, glancing at the closed gate where the dog usually appeared. Quito held his ground. He didn't move forward, but he didn't fold back into the earth either. He waited, suspended between habit and something new. "He's standing for the sound," Amani said softly. "Not just for the dog." They didn't cheer. It was too fragile a moment for that. But the look they shared carried a cautious kind of hope. Saba, for his part, seemed to understand something had shifted. When he was finally released, he no longer insisted on leading every walk. Some days he trotted ahead. Other days he fell back watching. As Quito navigated toward the chimes of the trough or the caretaker's stick on his own, he still lay by the stall at night, still pressed his back to the slats so a searching trunk could find him. But in the daylight, he began to occupy a slightly different place in Quito's orbit. Not commander, not anchor, witness. The turning point came one late afternoon. The sky was high and wide, the heat softened by a teasing breeze. The staff had opened the yard, and Quito stood near the center ears, flicking at the familiar sounds chimes on the wind, the knock of the log voices from the far side of the fence. Saba lay nearby, in a patch of shade, watching. "Let's see what he does," Ndlovu said, holding everyone back. Quito took a step toward the trough. No pause guided him. No breath marked the way. He hesitated, then took another step. His trunk skimmed the ground, adjusting for bumps and dips. He walked 3, 4, 5 paces all on his own, then stopped when the smell of water rose around him. A moment later, Saba got to his feet and ambled over. Quito turned his head at the sound and reached out, trunk touching the dog's shoulder. There was no desperate clutching this time, no shaking, no frantic search for reassurance. It was a simple greeting, almost casual. "There you are," rather than a "save me." "You see that?" Amani whispered. "Yes," Ndlovu replied. He didn't need Saba to get there. He wanted Saba when he arrived. From then on, the shift accelerated. Saba was no longer the only path through the darkness. He was a cherished presence within it. The staff began to understand the dog was no longer just Quito's eyes. He had become the memory of what it felt like to choose life. Time, as it tends to do, kept moving. Saba's muzzle turned wider. The fur along his spine thinned. He didn't chase birds anymore. Instead of trotting alongside Quito on every lap, he often lay down in their usual corner and simply watched the elephant walk. His breaths became heavier. Sometimes when the evening cooled quickly, he shivered despite the warm dust beneath him. On those nights, Keto reached out more often, trunk tracing the familiar line of his back, as if memorizing it. The staff saw it too. "He's getting tired," the junior vet said quietly one day, kneeling to rub Saba's ears. "Yeah," Amani murmured, watching Keto stand nearby, head tilted toward them. And Keto knows. The elephant's behavior had changed in subtle ways. He took longer to get moving in the mornings, as if giving Saba time to arrive. When they walked side by side, Keto's steps synced to the dog's slower pace. He stopped more often, trunk seeking contacts, lingering over each touch. Then one dawn the sound didn't come at all. The wind chimes knocked softly. The caretaker's stick tapped in its familiar rhythm. The log boomed its low 3-count before the gate opened. But there were no paws, no soft scrape, no rough, familiar breath. Keto stood in the center of his stall, ears straining. He turned his head from side to side, searching for the absence that now rang louder than any noise. He swung his trunk through the empty air and took 2 steps forward, then 3, then spun too quickly and stumbled. His heart pounded so hard it showed in the tremble of his skin. Panic clawed at him, old and deep. For a moment, everyone watching held their breath, waiting to see if he would slip back into that dark, bottomless place he'd been in when they first found him. He didn't. He froze. Chest heaving, he planted his feet, closed his blind eyes, and went still in a way that looked nothing like surrender. He listened. He listened past the sounds that weren't there, no pause, no rasping breath, and toward the ones that were. The chimes, the wind, the steady knock of the stick. Amani's voice soft and low, saying his name. The distant clatter of buckets, the quiet clink of metal from the feed shed. One by one, those sounds arranged themselves into a map he had been building for months, without realizing it. After a long, shaking breath, he reached for it. Keto stepped forward. Not toward Saba, because Saba was nowhere to be found, but toward the world. He walked to the trough. He found the open gate. He turned toward the yard, guided by echoes and scents, and the patterns he had learned in the shadow of a dog who was not there to guide him anymore. Only after he had taken those steps did Amani speak. "Tell them," she said quietly to the vet at her side. Nilovu cleared his throat eyes, stinging more than he cared to admit. "Saba passed in the night," he said. It was quick, peaceful. He just went to sleep and didn't wake up. There was no drama to it. No ambulance, no desperate measures, just an old dog's body deciding that enough was enough after a life spent surviving, and at the end, saving someone else. They buried him beneath a small acacia tree near the back fence, where he had once liked to lie in the afternoon shade. A simple mound of earth marked the spot with a worn leather collar placed on top. Later that day, they brought Keto to the place. He walked slowly, guided by hands and voices and the familiar drum of the log. When he reached the tree, he stopped. The air smelled different there. Fresh turned soil, the faint scent of leather warmed by the sun. Keto lowered his trunk. He explored the ground, tracing the edges of the mound, feeling where the earth rose and fell. His trunk brushed the collar, lingered over it, then returned to the soil. He repeated the circuit again and again, as if trying to understand a story that could no longer be told to him in footsteps and breath. He stood like that for a long time. He did not trumpet. He did not roar his grief to the sky. He simply existed in silence, sharing space with what remained of the friend who had once been the only reason he hadn't died. Eventually, he lifted his trunk away. Amani watched him, her heart clenched in her chest. "Do you think he knows?" she whispered. I think Ndlovu replied he knows something is gone, and I think he knows he is still here. Kido turned from the grave. His steps were slow, deliberate, but not broken. He didn't collapse. He didn't refuse to move. He carried himself with a quiet, heavy dignity, as if walking with an invisible weight balanced carefully on his back. He walked back toward the yard, toward the chimes, and the log, and the voices, and all the other sounds that made up his world. Each step was his own. Saba had not saved Kido by living forever. He had saved him by staying long enough. Long enough for a blind, broken calf to decide that life was worth trying for. Long enough for that calf to learn the shape of the world beyond a single heartbeat. Long enough for love to transform from something you cling to, so you don't fall into something that walks beside you, even after it's gone. Kido would never see the savanna in sunlight. He would never roam with a wild herd or feel the thunder of 100 elephant feet moving as one. But when he lifted his head to the wind deer's wide trunk, tasting the air, he carried within him the memory of a dog's rough breath and the sound of paws in dust and the simple, profound truth that had pulled him back from the edge. Someone had been there. And because of that, he was still here. Thank you for staying with this story until the end. If Kido and Saba touched your heart, please support us by subscribing to the channel. Every subscription helps us keep sharing true stories of resilience, connection, and hope, stories that deserve to be remembered and told.